Good evening and welcome to Building a Brave New Theater. My name is Rebecca Goodhart and I'm the producing artistic director of Elm Shakespeare Company. And it is my deep honor and joy to kick off tonight's event, BIPOC Directors Forum Part 2. And if it's anything like the first one, you are in for a real treat and an incredible conversation with 6 of the most talented, deep-thinking artists that I have the privilege to know. But before we get started, I'd like to just say a couple of things. First of all, Elm Shakespeare Company, which is in residence on the campus of Southern Connecticut State University, works on the unceded land of the Golden Hill Pagusset Nation. They are still looking for federal recognition even today. We want to take this moment to gratefully honor their historic stewardship of the land and to express our commitment to keep building our understanding and relationship with the land and the original inhabitants. Now, this series was born out of the activism and brilliant questions of the students at the theater department of Southern Connecticut State University. And the first series, which was started in November of 2020, was called Exploring Race and Shakespeare in 2020. And we had 3 goals for that series. The first was that we wanted to center, celebrate, and amplify the many brilliant Black, Indigenous, and Latinx artists and scholars who bring Shakespeare's works to life. Secondly, we wanted to have real conversations, not just about the issues and challenges of producing a 400-year-old white playwright, but also to interrogate the system around Shakespeare, which at times has been used to erase, to oppress, and even to harm other cultures. Third, we wanted to come together to create intentionality around the work that Elm Shakespeare Company does. Not just what we do, but how we do it, and of most importance, how we can do it better to really serve our community and this moment in history. Now, this second series, which has been called Holding Space and Giving Voice, has built upon that foundation and brings together a whole host of a diversity of artists who are making a difference, changing the production practices and the perspectives of the plays of William Shakespeare. So with that, I am about ready to introduce our moderator and host for the evening, but I would be remiss if I didn't say a few very special thank yous. First of all, thank you to you for being here and for participating in this conversation. Next, I want to say a huge thank you to our series sponsors, Elizabethan Club of Yale University, the Southern Connecticut State University Theater Department, SCSU Theater, and Webster Bank. But I'd also want to make sure that we mention and thank our many, many supporters, our private donors, our foundation, our public support, our corporations. It takes so much help to make sure we can do what it is we do, and we are so grateful. If you would like to join this support, we again would be incredibly grateful. And so we would invite you to visit www.elmshakespeare.org and click on that donate button. You can also find out all of the many, many things that we are doing. Now, it is time for me to introduce to you a dear friend of mine, a longtime member of Elm Shakespeare Company, a brilliant actor and director, Raphael Massey. Now, before he comes on, I want to tell you just a little bit about him. Right now, he is an artistic associate at Oregon Shakespeare Festival. Most recently, he directed an amazing production of Pericles for Connecticut Repertory Theater. In 2017, he directed Romeo and Juliet for Elm Shakespeare Company, which was named one of the top 5 productions in Connecticut by the Connecticut Critics Circle. In 2013, he was a classical directing fellow with the Drama League of New York. He's been a Killian Directing Fellowship finalist with Oregon Shakespeare Festival, and he has a host of directing and assistant directing credits, not only here, but also in England. Finally, he is an accomplished actor, and he holds a BA in theater as well as a BS in education from Southern Connecticut State University, and an MFA in staging Shakespeare from the University of Exeter. The University of Exeter, let me actually say that. So it is my distinct pleasure and honor to welcome the one and only Rafael Massey. Hi, Raphael.
Hi, thank you for that introduction.
Well, thank you. Well, I will leave you to in the capable hands of Raphael. And Raphael, we will see you at the end. Have a great conversation.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Yes, first of all, welcome to our audience for joining us for this second installment. It was so good the first time, we had to come back and do it again. My name is Raphael Massey. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm zooming to you from the ancestral and unceded territory and traditional land of the Takelma, Lagawa, Applegate River, Confederated Tribes of Siletz, Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, and Shasta people, colonially known as Ashland, Oregon. And it is always, even virtually, always good to come back to really my first artistic home. I consider it a privilege and honor every time I get to work with them and revisit a place that I hold dear in my heart. So here we are for round two. And without further ado, I am going to introduce our panelists. You all know them. If you were here for round one back in November. And if not, you're in for a treat. Again, I consider it an honor just to be able to share space with these people. I wish I could actually be in an actual room with them, but sharing space virtually will have to do. So without further ado, we have Antonio Ocampo Guzman, who is originally from Bogota, Colombia, is a master Linkletter voice teacher, has directed over 50 productions, and is the current chair of Northeastern University's Department of Theater and president-elect of the Voice and Speech Teachers Association. Welcome, Antonio. Next, we have Carl Cofield, who is an accomplished actor and a director and newly appointed head of NYU's graduate acting program. He was the director of Yale Repertory Theater's 2019 highly praised Afrofuturistic production of Twelfth Night, among many other acclaimed productions across the country. He is also the Associate Artistic Director of the Off-Broadway award-winning Classical Theater of Harlem. Welcome, Carl. Good to see you. Next, Dawn Monique Williams is the Associate Artistic Director of Aurora Theater in Berkeley, California, a celebrated director and a former resident artist at Oregon Shakespeare Festival, a former Drama League Directing Fellow, FAM, a TCG Leadership U grantee, and a recipient of the Princess Grace Foundation Theater Fellowship Award. Hi, Dawn. Good to see you. Madeline Sayet, who's a citizen of the Mohegan Tribe and executive director of the Indigenous Performing Arts Program at Yale University, an award-winning director, the author of the article Interrogating the Shakespeare System, and a recipient of the White House Champions of Change Award. And my friend, hey, Maddie. L. Peter Callender is the artistic director of the African American Shakespeare Company in San Francisco, studied at Juilliard and Webber Douglas Academy, and is an award-winning actor on and off Broadway, an accomplished director, and the recipient of the Payne-Knickerbocker Payne Award for his contributions to Bay Area theater. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone.
How are you?
I'm sure our audience, although we can't hear them, I see even in the chat, people are typing in applause. So I invite our audience to help us welcome our esteemed panelists. Grateful for you, grateful to share space with you again. And I want to leave this space for you to introduce yourselves in your own voice and maybe tell us a little bit about some of the work you've been creating in the last year or in the past 7 months since we last met. So I will leave the floor to our panelists to say a few words each.
Ladies first.
Should I name?
Fine, I'll go.
Do
Thank
it.
you, Peter.
Do it.
Great. Well, first of all, I love these people. I do it just to be in their presence. Such amazing people. Since last we met, which was November of last year, I was at that time in Arkansas in rehearsal, in person with some actors for what was a streamed production of Half-Life of Marie Curie. I have directed some audio plays and some Zoom things and some green screen things, and I'm making the most of these digital opportunities that exist, while at the same time at my home theater here in California on the unceded ancestral lands of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people, we are planning for our next season, which we hope will be in person. Our governor in just about a month, and like many others, that means we're just kind of waiting on what the theater unions determine is safe and wise. But we have announced an in-person season, which is crazy.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. And I've also, over the last 7 months, gotten an opportunity to check out your Pericles, Raphael, which was bananas. I was so thrilled, and saw Damien was in that. Oh my goodness, that was so great. And I saw Peter play Satchmo at the Waldorf, which was outstanding. So
Thank you. How nice.
So I'm glad to also see that my good friends and colleagues are putting it down in the digital sphere too. So check.
Thank you.
I'll pass the mic.
Well, I will just say hello then. I see Madeline is just smiling there, so I will jump in. Don, thank you for that. I'm currently at Syracuse Stage in Syracuse, New York, on the Onondaga reservation, former Onondaga reservation here. I'm having a great time playing Sam in Master Harold and the Boys. The 4th time that I've actually played this role. And it's brand new every time. Gilbert McCauley is our director here. I've got a terrific cast. Yes, I know. I'll tell him you did the Home Alone thing. He's terrific. I adore him. I'm learning so much more about Sam and Fugard and Master Harold and the Boys through his eyes and his knowledge. So I'm honored to be in the room with him. And that will be streamed in early June, everybody. We will not have a live audience, but it will be filmed for that. Speaking of that, right before I came out here, I was at the West Coast Black Theater Troupe directing Dominique Morisseau's Pipeline, also being streamed right now as we speak through next Tuesday. If you have a moment, please check it out. Dominique Morisseau's Pipeline. Since we gathered here, this esteemed group, a bunch of things. My goodness, I've directed a few things online. We are planning a brand new season at African American Shakespeare Company in San Francisco. We have booked some amazing directors. Our first offering will be the complete works of Shakespeare abridged, directed by Reed Martin, who was one of the original members of the original cast, which I'm so looking forward to do. To see. Then Cinderella, directed by Amy Marie Haven, and then Glass Menagerie, which will be directed by Monica Undunu, who is a professor of theater at Dartmouth. I'm really excited about that. Then I will direct Richard II. which I've acted in and Cal Shakes, but I've never directed, which I'm really looking forward to that. So it's been a wonderful year since last we met, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm honored to be in the room with this esteemed group of actors, directors, writers, artists. It's just, I'm humbled. I'm actually very humbled. So thank you. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
I will go now that it no longer falls under the constituency of ladies first, that I was not going to fall for. Chokais. Hey everybody, I'm Maddie. I'm a citizen of the Mohegan tribe. Super happy to be zooming in from our traditional lands here in Connecticut, which are also the traditional lands of the Shinnecock, Pequot, and Eastern Pequot nations. Since last we met, what have I been? So since last we met, I took on an additional position as co-artistic director of Red Eagle Soaring Native Youth Theater in Seattle, helping them while everything is virtual to transition to more nationally scaled models, which has been really exciting to get to work with Native youth during this time. I also did a lot of online development, I think, like a lot of folks. In addition to that, I ended up, I think, doing a lot more writing during this period. A lot of commissions for different things came in, and my solo show, Where We Belong, about the relationship between Shakespeare and colonialism and language, was filmed at Woolly Mammoth Theater Company and will be streamed June 14th to July 11th. So that's in the editing phase right now. And it was very strange to perform a solo performance with no one in the audience, I will say. 80 minutes of talking to myself, and I actually asked the only people in the room, the director and producer, if they could interpretive dance responses, since once we were filming, there was no verbal response allowed. So they came up with gestures for laughing and for being with me, when they would have laughed inside, because I felt understandably like a crazy person talking to myself for 80 minutes. But that was just, I just wanted to share that because I thought it was a very delightful moment in the American theater, that we could be like, okay, this doesn't work. Is there something that we can do in these strange times? And I also have accepted a position joining the faculty in the English department at Arizona State University in a new BIPOC cluster hire Ayanna Thompson put together for the fall, which I'm also very, very excited about. And so that's most of what I'm doing right now. And this month is exciting because there's a lot of development of new Native plays, but I'm coming here right off of facilitating a conversation with Joy Harjo. And I just want to share something that she said, because I'm thinking about it a lot in relationship to Where We Belong. And I'm also thinking about it a lot in relationship to Shakespeare right now, which was, she was talking about poetry being a space in which to hold contradiction. And I just thought that the specificity of that, the idea that like, that was part of, to her, what poetry was for, was when there are these two things that you don't know how to grapple with, they can sit together in this really powerful way within poetry. It was just something that really moved me. And I think sometimes now in theater, in contemporary theater, it tries to get stripped out. You say, well, is it this or is it this? Is it this or is it this? And both in Shakespeare and in a lot of other works that I really value, it's the ability to sit with both of those things at the same time. And so I just wanted to name that, because I just thought it was, I just thought it was a really valuable way of thinking about poetry that I just came away from. So good to be here with all of you.
Carl.
Hey everybody, it is a joy to be with you virtually again. I was so filled and so happy to spend Zoom time with everybody before, and thank you, Rebecca, for putting us and inviting us back to be together again. I have the great privilege to be in rehearsals currently, directing King Lear, directing Andre de Shields as King Lear. Super excited about that in person, which is in the COVID landscape. I think we're all learning what it means to be theater makers. We're all learning new ways to get our creativity going, and what COVID has forced us to improvise, adapt, and overcome. So I'm just humbled to be here with everybody and looking forward to this robust conversation, because I know it's about to be on, right, Dawn?
Wow.
Brother Antonio.
Buenas noches, I'm Antonio Campo Guzman, and I am zooming in, unfortunately, from the unceded territory of the Wampanoag and Pawtucket people here in Boston. And I'm amazed that I've always been amazed with all of you, but now that you have been working so much, because the thing I've been doing for the last 7 months is surviving, barely surviving, as a father, as a human being in this country, and as a chair of a theater department, going through the huge attack against critical race theory, for example, many other things that happen in the academy, and also as the president-elect of the Voice and Speech Trainers Association, trying to grapple with how do we teach voice and speech and what we call text in these new ways. And also, the aftermath of the death of my teacher, Kristen Linklater, and how to help support the Linklater Voice Center in Orkney. So it's been a really busy time, but I'll tell you what I have not done and what I will not be doing. Back in November, I shared with you that I was writing an article called My Farewell to Shakespeare. And during the conversation in November, I said, I don't think I can write this anymore. Well, I did not write it, and I will not write it. In part because I had already written it. So many years ago, through Ayanna Thompson, I met a wonderful professor at Stanford called Patricia Parker, who was putting together the Greenwood, now the Stanford Shakespeare Encyclopedia, and she had asked me to contribute something that I wrote literally more than 10 years ago. And then finally, it's going to be online this summer. And I realized that all of the thoughts that I had, I've been having for all these years. And I was much more articulate back then than I am now. So I just did a few little adjustments for that article. And I realized that my saying, I want to say farewell to Shakespeare, was just a big old dramatic gesture against the year and all that stuff. And it was just a big pose. I don't have any plans to do any Shakespeare in the near future, but come on, I'm a hypocrite. I'm about to direct an opera by a Western composer. I will be directing Euripides in the fall. So what am I going to say goodbye to Shakespeare? What is this cancel thing that I'm doing? So that's what I have not been doing. So I'm looking forward to chatting with all of you tonight. And again, thank you, Rebecca, so much for getting us back together.
We love to hear it. We love to see it. All the work, all the discussions, all the even whatever we've needed in the past year plus to navigate the circumstances of our realities. We love to see it. And several of you touched on kind of a good jumping off point for our larger conversations, I think. And this is going to be a really broad question. So do with that what you will, whatever it means to you. And that is, so we finished, I guess, or come through a leg of whatever this is, right? The leg of the journey, if you will, right? There's everything's starting to open back up. We have a vaccine. That we're in a much different place than we were when we met in November, and as far as the future goes. So the first thing that I'd like to throw out to the panel is, where are we now in the landscape of theater? We've already been started talking about having to shift to virtual theater being a real component, even going forward, to what it's like to start producing live theater, to being in a room by yourself. What is it going to mean when we can actually gather in groups again? Where are we now in the world of theater? And I guess tangentially, part B to that question is as how it relates to classical theater and Shakespeare as well. So in your assessment, in your estimation, in your experience up until this point, and kind of looking ahead, how would you codify where we are right now?
I think, and I'll just begin and I'll come back to make more comments on it. But I think as artists, as creative artists, as producers, as writers, as presenters, we must understand that our audiences over the past 15, 16 months have developed likes for other mediums, right? They have developed likes for Ubu and Bubu and Subu and all those other acronyms that have developed over the past few years. So it's become so easy for them now to sit in their pajamas or sit someplace wherever they are in their homes and be entertained, because we weren't around doing what we've been doing. So now we have to understand that to get them back, we can't do the same things in the same way. We have to be slightly different. We have to shake the ball up a little bit and see how it turns out, see which angles now we can play with. Because look, we've all been sent to our rooms. We all behaved badly. We all were sent to our rooms, right? Now the doors are opening up slowly, right? We have to change our behavior in so many different ways. So I think as artists, as producers, as theater makers, we've got to look through a different prism and say, look, we're going to do Shakespeare. I'm going to do Richard II. I'm directing Romeo and Juliet at American Stage in a few months. What's the difference? What am I going to do that's different? That's going to say, I want you guys to sit out in the hot sun, because it'll be outdoor performances. And how am I going to make this production different? And I think we all have to look at all our works, not only Shakespeare, but all our works differently, and see how we can get people back in the theater and interested in what we are doing, because of what we have done, but how we are doing it differently now. What our languages are what visuals, what different visuals are we offering them? I mean, Carl's version of King Lear, oh my God, I can't wait. I wanna like get on a plane now. Please give Andre my best, by the way. Somebody wrote in the chat, he is gonna kill it. And yes, he is going to slay. I adore that man. So I would love to be in the audience to see that, or see it in some capacity. But I'm sure, Carl, you are already thinking of how many different ways can I present that speech on the mount, blow winds, crack your cheeks, you cataracts, and how are you going to present that through Andre's visage, through his tones, right? What lighting, what sound? It's got to be, you've got to twist it a little bit. And I know you will. So I think as producers and directors and artists, we have to look through the prism a little differently as we come back.
I'll just jump in and chime in and say yes. And, I think what the pandemic has forced is what we specialize in. It's creativity and looking at problems in a different way and reimagining things. So I think if anybody is prepared to pivot and change and add to, we're in a Zoom room full of those people who are innovative thinkers and creative thinkers. And I think that's a commodity that will be in high demand in the post-COVID landscape. To that, I definitely know that people are yearning to be in the ritual of theater again. It's like going to your favorite restaurant, just because, you haven't had sushi in 14 months, you're yearning for it and you want to go back to it and you want to be with people. And, I wholeheartedly agree that people have adapted in the time that COVID has forced us into online platforms, Netflix and all that isolation. Those platforms sustained us through these hard times. But I'm hopeful, cautiously optimistic that once we are able to gather in that solely unique ritual of theater, that hopefully there will be a boom in that. But to El Peter's thing, we have to be ready and willing to add to it, right? And say, how do we make our product? And I don't want to, reduce it to a product and this capitalist thing, but how do we bring the 13-year-old Black boy who has no interest in seeing Shakespeare to the theater? And I think to El Peter's, comment, I'm trying to engineer this Lear for that 13-year-old Black boy like me to say, golly, I had no idea it could be like that. reading it dry on the page, hopefully that brother Carl put some gumbo sauce on this, because that is not how my English teacher and I read it in class. So hopefully that's what we can do.
I would like to add three things, I think. The first one, I think that in general terms, we're in a time of repair because so much has been broken in the fabric, both of our society and of our community as theater makers. And I think that we need to come together in a way to repair. What that means, I think, is more immersive theater, less presented theater, less prosceniums and more theater in the rounds, more immersive places where people can see themselves within the life of the performance. I also see a big reconsideration or a reevaluation of how we support model that many of us have to work under, be it the professional theater or be it the academic theater. It's all a business. And there are so many things that have been brought so patently to life during the last year, both in terms of the pandemic, the social and racial justice reckoning, the change in the presidency, all those kinds of things. But we need to find a more just way of making theater and compensate people for their work and their contributions. And lastly, I think in the world of theater, particularly, there has to be a re-envisioning. Carl, I'm so delighted that you got the job at NYU, that a re-envisioning of how we train people, because how we train people is pathetic on a variety of levels, from the basic BA program, like the one that I lead, to the top MFA programs and everything in between. We need to look at who's training people for what and how we're doing that training. So I see it as a big time for repair. I have never liked restoration comedies, but I think the word restoration might be an interesting word for this time.
I'm gonna yes and the yes ands. I think my colleagues have all said wonderful things. When I hear the question, like, where are we? I really do internalize it, because as a theater maker, I am so ready to be back in the rehearsal room with other humans, crafting a story. As a theater patron, I am very scared. This time has really profoundly changed me. I feel, I love that Antonio used the word repair. I feel like we are definitely in that place. I also love this word restoration. It definitely makes me think of what it means for the theaters to kind of like have been shut down and reopen. But I have kind of become a recluse, and I'm sort of scared of public spaces, and I don't know what it will take to make me feel safe. It's certainly not all the political scientific rhetoric is not building confidence. So for me, I'm really interested in, as Peter said, like, what are the things we have to do different? So what are the hybrid models going forward? Not only as a theater maker, but just in my life overall, this time has afforded me so many opportunities to connect with people digitally that I otherwise saw so infrequently, communicated with so infrequently. I mean, the number of times Maddie and I have been able to be on a call together. I mean, the last time I saw Carl in person had to be 2017. So to get to spend time with Carl virtually over this last year, more times than I had in person, 3 or 4 years ago. And I don't want to lose that. And I do, I do crave for these opportunities to happen in person, but I also do love that the technology has allowed us to have these digital spaces to connect with people across the fibers. Your comic book Pericles, Raphael, was out of this world, and that is a gift that the technology gave us. And I'm sure you would have conceived it completely different for in person. But I'm really invested in, I have literally spent a lot of money investing in the ring lights and this light and this box and how many monitors and the learning all this software. And now I can video edit and run a live talk show. So I want my investment to pay off. I'm really interested now in the intersections of hybrid, of how we take the digital back with us into spaces, how we try and consider it as an opportunity for accessibility and breaking down barriers. So that's where I am at, is really how can I have the best of both worlds? How can I be a theater maker and in space with people, and how can I remain a theater patron even if I'm a little anxious about sitting in a space with 1,000 strangers? And what is the synergy? How can I have both things is where I'm at.
Thinking about that, just building on what Dawn was just saying, I've been thinking a lot about, yes, I too do no longer want to leave the Zoom cave at times, despite my desire to make things and to share space. And I've been thinking about it a lot recently because there's a lot of people now who are like, it's over, the pandemic's over. Like they have this like, it's over attitude. And I'm like, my industry is still completely closed. I mean, not like completely closed, but you know what I mean? Like you still can't go to a theater and see a show. So I'm like, how do you think that it's over if we, and so it brings up these questions for me. Are we gonna skip the phase where everyone wears masks in the theater? Like what are actually and that we distance, like what are actually the expectations going to be when we return to live theater? And that actually makes me really afraid, because I assumed up until now that when we do go back, there'll be some in between stage, you know, that there will be masks or there will be some sort of safety precaution. But now I'm no longer sure that that exists. And then in relationship with that also, depending on the company or the situation I've been working in, like there was a recent sort of project that was in person, but the producers hadn't fully organized the testing, and suddenly, you know, all the actors show up at the testing center, and if they don't have insurance, they're being charged $500. If blah 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 blah, you know, like the orchestration around some of these inequities within the field and within the systems that are actually taking care of our artists were just very, very, very apparent. And so I am curious not only how we go back to live, right? Understanding that there was, I mean, a show I recently worked on had like $40,000 of the budget dedicated to testing, you know, like, is that sustainable, right? Like there's all of these different questions that are arising in relationship to how we go back. But then in addition to that, thinking about what Dawn was saying about accessibility, like for native theater, the pandemic has been like, I don't want to say like a renaissance, but it's like in terms of accessibility, it's like you make something that is seen by thousands of people who would not have been able to see it otherwise. And there's all of this ability to make work so much easier than there was before, because you're not flying people from far off locations, and it's accessible by people on reservations that couldn't get to it otherwise. And I've been teaching in multiple time zones and running organizations in multiple time zones, right? So there's all of these different things that I'm like, it's going to be so different when this is no longer a part of how we operate. And I'm scared that it will no longer be a part of how we operate. Like I love seeing all of these people on a Zoom call. And I also love sometimes getting to sleep in my bed, like for months at a time, you know, like that. So I'm not sure I'm ready to give it up, you know, because I don't know about the rest of you, but I started to get those emails where it's like, okay, great, come fall, you'll be on a plane this day, and you'll be on a plane this day, and you'll be on a plane this day. And I'm like, I don't know if I'm ready to be on like 2 planes, like let alone 6 planes. Like we don't really know what's going to happen with all of that. So yeah, so all of that is to say, I'm excited for what we make and how we imagine beyond the limitations of our circumstance. But I really am afraid right now of this potential like return to before in a way that I don't think is as useful as continuing to build on and learn from all of the new tools and ideas and ways of creating and collaborating that have been, you know, developed during this time.
Yeah, and that's a great, that question of the rush to return to normal versus the way forward, and those actually not necessarily being the same thing, right? There is like this movement, oh great, we don't have to wear masks anymore, it's all over. Actually, we're just beginning a new phase and we still don't know how it's going to turn out. So I think, you know, collectively we might want to pump the brakes a little bit on certain things. And I think, you know, to Peter's point of being flexible and this question of accessibility and intersection between what we've discovered in the last 14 or 15 months and what we already know, and what does that create from now as we move forward, which leads me kind of to my next one. I can already tell we're not going to get to everything that I wanted to talk about, because I'm already off on something that wasn't even one of my notes, but that's cool. This question of intersectionality and accessibility, I'm curious in the various theater institutions that you're all attached to, as you start to have these conversations about season planning and things of that nature and what that looks like. Have there been discussions, kind of to Dawn's point, of what a hybrid of virtual theater and live theater might look like, or how are those conversations going? And I'm particularly asking Carl because I want to see that at King Lear, and I'm on the West Coast, and it didn't sound like you're going to be streaming it. You said live, but I want to see it. So it's things like that, like Maddie was talking about, there's been so many more opportunities because we are in a digital medium. Does that just go away now? Or what are those conversations looking like as we begin to integrate ourselves back into live theater?
Well, I'll just say one thing that really resonated was what Maddie said about just being very clear and transparent about what testing and making theater in post-COVID landscape looks like. Our budgets have ballooned, right? And so I think just from an institutional standpoint, right, we're having to balance, like, do we invest in a 3-camera shoot, right? Or do we try and do it live, but then we got to pay, the testing, the Quest Diagnostics of the world. You're running anywhere from 1 to 50 tests a week. So it's a real balancing out in the calculus of, like, to get the production done. One thing I will say that as a parent, the pandemic has shined some light on is the educational model. And I wonder if that is transferable to the theatrical model, meaning that we have a hybrid. So arbitrarily Monday and Wednesday, we can do, in person, socially distant, capped capacity. And the other days we film it, or it's shown on an online platform. So I think that's one of the things that I've been peeping from how my children's schooling has been sort of educating students on the fly and making pivots left and right to make sure that we get people in, right? Because I think that's vital to theater and maintaining that vocabulary, but also saying, hey, some people aren't ready yet. They're not comfortable. How do we accommodate them also? So I think going forward, it would behoove us to look at hybrid models also, and not just a binary of either or.
Yeah, I agree with Maddie. I think we all should still embrace these little Brady boxes, because we've learned, as Dawn said so eloquently, we've learned so much. We've invested so much. We've got these lights and these cameras and these microphones and these things that make us look good and feel good and sound good. And we've created new ways of expressing ourselves. We've got I've got an interview show. Dawn has an interview show. We're doing. And I think for theater companies, yes, we all want to get back in the theater. And yes, the thing I miss and the thing I talk about with students and fellow artists is that synchronization of heartbeat that the audience shares with the actors on stage. There's nothing like that. However, I do believe, thank you, Zoom, I do believe that we need to continue to broadcast our work internationally. And Zoom has offered us, or any other of these platforms, they've offered us a way of literally having a world premiere of something. And I think there's something to that, whether it's just conversations like this, or whether it's play readings, or whether it's getting a play from Ghana, from Nigeria, from South Africa, and producing it and saying, this is, we're working with this company in Ghana, we're working with this company in New York, we're working with this company in South Africa, we're working with this company in Trinidad and Tobago, and we're synchronizing our work with their work. And this is what we are presenting to the nation, to the world. So I think there's a way of continuing to work in this, on these platforms. But I also think in a humorous way as well, it's interesting that the audience gets to wear the masks as opposed to the actors, right? We are always putting on these comedy tragedy masks, and it'll be interesting for the audience to wear masks for the first time, and I find that interesting. And we also have to make sure, and as Carl mentioned, that 13-year-old, 14-year-old, 15-year-old. My gosh, I love it. I don't think I've chosen a season at African American Shakespeare Company in San Francisco that did not have children's programming at the forefront. We have to grab hold of their attention, of their knowledge, of their brains, of their hearts, and hold on to it and create something that they can see themselves in constantly, that they can always see themselves in. I always say, look, if I am out sick from school, or I take a day off from school for whatever reason, and that day was the school picture day, right? And then 4 days later, I come back to school and everyone's looking at those photos, the class pictures, and I am not in that class picture. I'm not going to spend too much time holding that thing in front of my face. I'm not going to be as interested in it because I am not in that picture. And I think right now we all have to be careful to include all races, all genders, all ages, and let what we do. We want you to understand King Lear. We want you to understand Richard III, Richard II. We want you to get it. You know, I did a production of Othello recently at African American Shakespeare Company, and one of the kids on our school day said, I forgot I was watching Shakespeare because it's so clear and it's so understandable. And just because of cutting, pasting here and there, making and that's our audience of the future. So I think this medium and other mediums like this to be sustained throughout our return to theater, our restoration, which I love, again, I love that word. But we have to keep them interested and around the world and around the country as well. So I think this platform and other platforms will continue to help us thrive as we slowly, and I believe that it has to be slowly, re-enter the live theater phase.
You know, I don't like to cut anybody off. Great, yes. Since you brought it up, Peter, or finished with it, I'm gonna just pivot a little bit so we talked about theatrical institutions. So I want to shift a little bit to something that several people have touched on, which is education. Antonio mentioned the assault on critical race theory and training for actors in general in the United States. And Carl's talking about the boy that he doesn't want to give him the experience that he has reading King Lear in high school. He wants to give him something that's more accessible, as did Peter. So I think most of you are attached some way to educational components as well as your work, you know. So I'm just wondering what the shift is there that's different than how you approach your work in the theater, and for our new appointees, Carl with NYU, Maddie with Red Eagle, and also with Arizona State, I guess Arizona State in this case. What is your mindset kind of going into this educational landscape post pandemic, as opposed to those of us who have kind of been in there throughout the whole time?
Well, Raphael, let me just jump in by saying, you know, I think that is something that learning the lessons of COVID and hearing what Dawn and Peter were saying, there's an entrepreneurial spirit that I definitely think that we have to address with the next generation of actor, theater maker, what have you. To have these lights, to utilize these online platforms to get work out, right? When I was coming up through the ranks, there was a very regimented system. You had to write your play, and then you had to get a little off-Broadway theater or a little theater someplace. Then you'd have to, you know, coax people to come and see it. And then you have to get the right gatekeepers to agree to come. So I think one of the benefits of this Zoom platform that we've already addressed is that we bypass all the middle people. And if we get the investment out there, if we make content for TikTok and Snapchat, and we use these platforms in our favor, we can be the creators that we are. And we don't have to wait for the phone to ring. We don't have to wait for permission. We don't have to wait for the producer to call and ask us to audition. So I would say educationally, that's one of the things I'm really interested in. How do we give more agency to the actor, right? And pivoting ever so slightly, but I think this is a huge thing that has been on my mind for a long time, and I think plays right to the heart of our conversation tonight. So for those who don't know, Howard University's classics program is going through a bit of a tough conversation about where classics fall in the curriculum. And I'm gonna go out on a limb and say it's not just at Howard University where these conversations are happening. Do we need old white westernized men in our curriculum? I'm going to be bold and transparent, and this might be an unpopular view. I think it's a yes and proposition. Yes, and we study those, but we expand the canon to what we consider classics. So if I'm doing Othello, if that's on the syllabus, we're also reading Keith Hamilton Cobb's American Moor, comparing and contrasting. But I think it's valuable to study and say, hey, listen, everyone, I know this might not have aged well. The shelf life on Taming of the Shrew is pretty limited. But we shouldn't just disregard everything. So I know that might not be a very popular view, but to me, it's a yes and proposition that going forward, learning the lessons of the past can catapult us to the future and a better future.
Yeah, I think just to build on that, this semester, as past semester, I was teaching the MFA acting students at the program that in San Diego that's attached to the Old Globe, and the way I was framing the Shakespeare class, every single play, it was to basically cover as much of the canon as possible. Was why would you do this play? Like, you know, is this like they need to justify it in any conversation? It's like if there is a scene that is happening, they need to engage with why it would be relevant. Now, even as actors, now I recognize by the end of that class, I might get them in trouble, but I don't really care. So, you know, I'm sorry if I got them in trouble in the long run with some director who doesn't care what they think, but then that director, you know, is somebody who I don't really want to be friends with anyway. So, and then they can come back and they can work with me and everything will be fine. But yeah, it was this thing of like, you know, like, it's like, no, we're not going to talk about the plays historically, blah, 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 blah. We're going to talk about, yes, we're going to read them chronically. This is a human being, a man, in a time period. But then we're going to talk about, like, if you were to do this, what would that mean right now? And what were the ways that you would actually present and address, you know, how to approach this in this exact moment. And it was also interesting. The other thing I was thinking about, and it was actually good for me too, because I was working on Where We Belong, which because of the way that it deals with Shakespearean colonialism, it's evolved in a way that I don't know that I actually necessarily, to be honest, like the dramaturgical evolution of it. I think that it's gone too far in a direction. Originally, like one of the whole point of the piece was about being between these two things. And it feels like it's gone further in a direction than I would like it to. But while I was doing that, I was also grappling with these students and like, why should this be formed? And like actually having that conversation constantly, right? Of like, how does this play earn its space right now? And actually engaging in that, which I just continuously found very, very fascinating and very, very useful coming from each individual student's perspective. And some of them, you know, don't want to work on a play, just like some of us don't want to work on certain plays because we don't think, but to make sure that they're engaging that way was really, really the point. And then also, I also thought it was interesting that I had a lot of students who, I wasn't directing students this semester in an actual work, but I had a lot of students who were like so mad that they were forced to do Zoom theater. They were like, why don't they just let us make a film? Like then we could have a reel, it would be in a reel, and then we would have a career. But instead, like, we have to do Zoom theater because they told us it has to be live. And they were like enraged by this principle, you know? And I was like, I see your points. Like, that is in terms of like what everyone's been talking about like them being like, you know, so good with TikTok and media, and they're not afraid of it the way that, you know, sometimes people in older generations are. And I was just like, that actually is really valid. Like, why didn't we just let them make films? Like, why were we like, we have to do Zoom theater? And so, yeah, so I'm just really thinking about the agency that they all have. And then coming into ASU, the reason I'm excited about the position is I'm the only practitioner coming into an English department that specifically, you know, the Center for Medieval and Renaissance Studies at ASU is specifically known right now for its early modern critical race theory and like looking at those issues in that time period. So I'm like, okay, cool. Like, what does that mean then if we then take all of that work and start engaging with it from performance perspectives and bring in people who can be a part of that conversation? So it isn't just academic, but that's really exciting to me for a lot of different reasons. But yeah, I mean, I think that like when in doubt with teaching, my instinct is always to like engage in deeper questions and figure out what I can actually learn from the students and so I think that's really space of what are the tools that we could actually be giving them that will actually help them as they go forward instead of tools that maybe we have right now. And one of my favorite things about teaching Shakespeare during the pandemic is if there was a moment where it was like, as someone asked me some like esoteric reference about, you know, some early modern play that maybe I didn't know the author of, we would all just look it up together. We would all be like, great, we don't know. And then we could just look it up together, you know, because we're all on our computers already. Instead of being like, well, let me pretend like I have some secret answer. And then we would all have different articles and we could all engage from different points of the, you know, debate. And that sort of spirit of inquiry, I just found really exciting that this medium allowed for as well.
I would like to offer, so my internet got caught up and I think I got kicked off for a little bit, but this idea of agency is really dear to me when it comes to the training of actors. And, you know, the entrepreneurial spirit that we need to install in them so that, I mean, literally maybe the agent can go away and people can actually get to do their own work. But more specifically, I think that there's so many ways in which we have trained actors in the past that it's a good time for us to repair and restore and rethink. I mean, all the old tropes of personalizing your acting and digging into people's psychology and emotional life and all that kind of weird manipulation and odd pseudo psychology that many of us certainly have done my share of that in the past, that I think needs to be rethought in light of not only just a pandemic, but where we are as a country and as a society. Especially if the UFOs are actually coming to get us, which I sincerely hope they are. In the world of voice and speech, for example, this notion of how do we teach, you know, do we use the word classics? Is there a certain way of, you know, speaking with distinction? Is that something that we still do? Is that something that we do with people who are not from dominant cultures? How do we teach people relaxation? Is that a universal concept that anybody can relax? I learned, you know, I'm a linked theater teacher, and I read recently that, for example, might be the worst piece of advice I can possibly give them. It might re-trigger deep trauma that I have. No, it's not going to help the actor. So going back to my idea of repair, I think that we also have to reconsider in the educational theater how we are training actors and for what.
Yes, and to all of that. So sometimes I'm like, I don't really have anything to add, but I agree with everything. There's deeper questions of how does that work begin of retraining, because it's, you know, so vast, right? However, I want to be mindful of the time. Maybe we need to have a panel on this is how we ended up with a part 2, because I started running my mouth. like maybe we need to have a panel just on the educational component of theater and et cetera, et cetera. But I won't go down that road today. I want to be mindful of the time. I do have, before we get to some questions from our audience, I have one final offering for discussion, is that we talked a lot about the pandemic and kind of where theater is existing right now. Another huge component of the past year has been the social unrest and protests in a way that I've never seen in my lifetime. And it's across so many different communities of people, right? Black Lives Matter, AAPI, it's just ongoing. It's like, it seems like you put one fire out and there's another one raging right behind you, and internationally as well, not just in the United States, but really in various places all over the world. And so my final offering for discussion is, how has the civil unrest, the protests, the various movements on the social landscape impacted how we are approaching theater as we begin to move out of the pandemic, which was enough on its own. But we have this added component that has definitely had a palpable impact. So I'm just curious as to how you see things as having shifted given the social landscape.
Much of my work in the last year has actually been focused on this, Raphael, and in varieties of ways. I'm on so many committees and task force, and they're all, theater makers, and I'm also, getting gigs that I probably wouldn't otherwise get if people weren't like looking back through their rosters of like, oh, who haven't we hired? Who haven't we had in the room? But I've been talking to, like today I was in a 2-hour long, I have a weekly standing meeting of this group here in the Bay Area, and all the work is about this anti-racism. And I'm curious how it ties into this idea that some of my colleagues have talked about of this, like, the pandemic's done, we're going back. Like, what will, are we leaving this work behind? How are we carrying this work with us? I have had to be the interrupter, the disturber in meetings where people are talking about temperature checks at doors and should we have a vax pass or not a vax pass? And I'm like, do you know though, for years we haven't actually just dealt with like how somebody who uses a mobility device can like use the restrooms in our building, and now we're revisiting this infrastructure related to COVID, but we haven't dealt with all the other, the ableism, the racism, transphobia that we're upholding. And so that's been a big part of my work. And I feel like that's the work I'm going to be called to continue to do moving forward. And when I say I'm going to be called, yes, of course, I think people will pick up the phone and call me, but I mean like my higher purpose, right? Like my calling, that I'm not going to be okay just saying like, well, we did that and equity said we can, the actors union said we could go, so let's go. I think we must continue to interrogate. I mean, I'll just name it. We had an article released for the theater. I work at Aurora Theater in Berkeley, California, about our theater today. And it has a picture of our artistic director when he was so young, I mean, like an 8-year-old picture. And I wrote to the artistic director, I said, you really got to start posing in pictures with people other than white guys, because this has to be the 3rd or 4th picture in the last 3 months that they have run of our artistic director. And the only other person in the picture with him is another white guy. And I'm like, I think that makes us look bad. And I get it. They want to run the picture of the AD. What you got to widen your circle, bro. Like, I can't, I can't have my name on this theater, and every picture that's being run in local media is of a bunch of white dudes. And so I just, you know, in the before times, I might have just like jokey, haha, but now I'm just like, nope, 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 scratch it, not having it. And I feel like I won't want to stay in a theater that isn't continuing to really interrogate those practices and really look at the ways we have excluded a lot of people. And you know, I'm often somebody who's sort of, you know, in terms of the rank and file, thought, yeah, I'm a queer brown woman. I don't have a lot of privileges, but I have enough to want to stand in solidarity with the most marginalized among us, the most vulnerable among us. And I would think I wouldn't sacrifice my directing career for much, but I think I would sacrifice it for that. I don't want to be a part of a theater that continues to be elitist and ableist and racist.
I'll be very brief here, and this is a calling out. I do intend to be brief. I saw a photograph of a young Black child, must have been 9, 10 years old, and it's from behind. Someone took a picture from behind him, and it's his birthday, and he's looking out onto the street, and there's a police car, and the photo is of him in front of his bicycle with his hands up in the air. It's a little Black kid, and I think his auntie took the picture, and the cops pulled up in front of the house to wish him happy birthday because they saw the balloons and they were driving by and they just wanted to say happy birthday. But that little 10-year-old misinterpreted that entire moment, and he dropped his bike and he raised his hands up in the air. I was literally in tears when I saw that. Okay, and I could still cry now because the image of it is still haunting me. But I'm putting a calling out to everybody, to our youth, from any race, color, creed, gender, style, whatever it is. Write your experiences, write your thoughts. You know, Lear, going back to King Lear, isn't it some scholarship that said Shakespeare wrote King Lear during a pandemic? Look, the work that could come out of this from our young people, from our indigenous people, from our gay people, from our straight people, from our bi people, from our queer people, please put your work, put your heart on paper, send it to theaters, look to see which theaters, check out Dawn Monique at Aurora, check out me. Please send your works to us, write it. And if it doesn't matter if good, bad, ugly, just put it on paper. Let us know what your feelings are. Let us know, because you never know. You just never know where the next August Wilson is. You never know where the next Susan Laurie Parks is, Nambi Kelly, Kimberly Ridgway, all these amazing young artists coming up. We don't know who you are unless you let us know who you are and where you are. And I really strongly believe that through this pandemic, through this Black Lives Matter, queer lives matter, all lives matter, whatever we feel, write it, put it on paper, let us know what you're thinking about, and allow us to read it. And then you just never know where the next American classic may come from. And that's my calling out. I just need to read those stories, because it's beyond me sometimes, and I know it is, and I've written something on my own that's being produced now, and I'm very proud of it. But I need to read what other folks are dealing with through their personal perspective. I was not born in this nation. I'm an immigrant. I am proud to say that, and I'm proud that I'm here, that my mother brought me here, and I'm living the dream, right? And to see what happened on January 6th to this nation, and now it's being looked at as if it was just another day of tourists passing through the Capitol. I punched the wall. I hope I didn't put a hole. I was so angry to hear that. So please, we just, theater leaders, theater producers, theater directors, we need to hear the stories that are being compiled. and felt right now throughout the nation? Send it to us. Send it out to us.
I just want to build on everything in relationship to that's been said, thinking about this question, and say I think probably one of the biggest shifts I've experienced during the pandemic is in relationship to theater is actually, and this relates to education too, is that I feel like so much of what we're trained into is like theater as a place in which we need to be accepted in order to matter. That is the space that, like, if for some reason something has gone wrong, we can't stop and say no or stop and heal ourselves. Like we have to belong there, or we can't like handle the world. And I think probably because I was trapped in my house for most of the year, I was like, no, actually I am fine in my house, like my 1-bedroom apartment, but house. So but I was trapped here and I was fine, And so I think what happened was then I actually said no a lot in rooms. I sent a lot of people emails calling them colonizers. I did things like threaten to leave a theater over an incident, right? Things I would never have done before, because actually I had a different sense of like, not even self-worth, but like, it's not worth this. It's like, it was like, this story is not worth being told under circumstances of harm. And I think that that's something that I'm really taking away, is that we need everyone's voices, and we need to invite everyone's voices in, and we also need to educate them to be able to say no. And I think that the year of this year of reckoning has really also created an environment in which people now see the people who will have their back when they say no, and that they're not alone. And I think that that is so significant in how we move forwards, is knowing that actually, like, yes, we do want to collaborate and we do want to love each other and all of that, but also we can have boundaries. And if someone steps over our boundary, which too many directors are trained to do, too many directors are trained to go, I'm going to step over your boundary and it's going to be good for you. And you're just going to get over it. And we're just going to keep pushing, right? And actually, no, it's like, if you have a boundary that is a real boundary for you and you say no, that's that. Like, to go past that boundary in service of a product is the definition of extractive colonial system. That is the definition of it, right? If you're saying this person's life and their values and their feelings are not worth it, but I'm going to go and I'm going to push them past where they're comfortable so that I can get something out of them, that's not what I show up in the theater for. So those are just some of the things that I'm thinking about in relation to all this, in order to actually create the space in which everyone feels like they can make their best work going forwards, instead of feeling like they have to fit in within some of the more harmful terms, I think, that have been set up within this industry.
I can't add too much to that, because that's dope. Sadly, I will say to your question, Raphael, and this is a real thing that I've been grappling with since the pandemic. I'm not surprised by any of it. And I don't think anything has changed from the way I approach making theater, telling the stories that are interesting to me. As a Black man growing up of a certain age, I wish I could say I was shocked by some of this stuff. If anything, to Don Monique's point, the phone has, the emails have come in more in abundance. But it's I don't want to sound flippant, but I've been here before. When John Singleton and Spike Lee and Matty Rich and so were on the cover of the New York Times, and they said, has Hollywood finally arrived? And then 2 years later, we were right back to, you can't get a Black movie made because it won't sell in China. So, I mean, I really hope in this moment, this might be another unpopular opinion, but now's the time to overreach and make demands. Because once this moment passed, the producers, the whoever else, they're going to claw it back anyway. So you might as well go huge, right? So my thing is, at NYU, I'm trying to make it free. Well, Carl, you probably won't be able to do that. They'll claw, but you might as well swing for the fences. I'm playing with the house's money. And if you're going to give it to me now, when this moment in time is past, and it will pass, the rebalancing and the recalibration might be severe. So I would just say, we've been put in these positions. Let's try and disrupt it, as Don Monique said. Let's be those disruptors. Yeah, I just wish I could say I felt different in this moment, and that is both sad, honestly, because I think as theater makers, we are doing a political act whenever we make something, right? The minute I even come into the rehearsal hall, that's a political act in and of itself. And I am mindful and of the privilege, right? That I even have the privilege to walk in that room. So I have to be mindful of that. And, you know, I don't want to bore everybody, but I got to make sure to everyone's safety level to get the best work. To Maddie's point, I'm not interested in somebody walking away and saying, you know, that was a terrible experience. It was beautiful, but it was terrible. I believe there can be a little bit of both. Could I have gone farther? Maybe, but it was, I learned so much about myself. And it was a beautiful room. And what we were aiming at was truly, that was the ideal thing of theater. So anyway, that's a long-winded answer, Raphael, of saying that in this moment, June 6th, I hate to say it, it was more outlandish than I thought, but not more outlandish to me than Charlottesville. Not more outlandish than the Klan walking through my neighborhood when I was 6. I mean, I've seen it. They're not going to stop me from trying to make the theater that I want and hopefully community.
Here. Just
Well said.
when people
Well said.
ask me, I've interviewed for a lot of academy jobs where people ask me, you know, what's the relationship with theater and social justice? For me, there's never been a distinction. I'm a Black woman, and I built my career around doing Shakespeare. I was never supposed to be here. So for me, it's always all been about social justice. So Brother Carl, bless up, bless up.
Here. I echo all of that.
It is so refreshing to hear all of you, Madeline.
Yes.
Thank you. You know, because I struggle a lot as one of the few Latino chairs that are in the country, and particularly my university, by attempting to exercise the little privilege that I have as being the chair and also being tenured to say, no, we're not going to do it that way. Why? Because it's ridiculous and we're not going to do it. Oh, but what worries me when it comes to the professional theater coming back or reopening or restoring, whatever you want to call it, is that, and Peter, you know, I'm an immigrant that I came here as an adult, right? And I say this with love. And my country, my birth country of Colombia is right now in a big mess, bigger than usual, but big mess. And I say this with love. But there is such hypocrisy in this country. And there's such hypocrisy in the people that go to theater. At least I'm talking about the Boston area. And there's such hypocrisy of people who say that Black Lives Matter. But do we have to see another play about Black people? Do I really have to go see? Or do I stay home and watch some Netflix and then I have to get out of the house and things like that, right? So that's what that worries me, the hypocrisy. Because going back to my earlier thing about we still have to, you know, sell tickets and get the board running and get the funders and all that kind of stuff, all that capitalistic infrastructure that makes our work happen. If we don't change that economic model, my fear is that we're going to have to go back to those bizarre ways of functioning that makes us stay stuck in the mud. You know, I'm mostly a pessimist, occasionally a passive person optimist, but hopefully things will be a little bit different if the government of this country begins to give money to the arts. And if corporations realize that all this creative thinking that we can give can also benefit them in their boardrooms and the CEOs and all that kind of stuff. And there's a better way of establishing a relationship with corporations and foundations and stuff that actually give us money because they value the arts, then maybe we could be better. So you all give me hope.
Yes.
Yeah, it's discussions like this exactly that give me hope. Next panel, no time limit. is what I propose. Because we can go down
Yeah.
any one of these roads and just keep going. But we need to get to a few questions from our audience. If you have any questions, please feel free to throw them into the Q&A tab on your screen. And we'll do our best to get to as many of them as we can. I hope I didn't just end that conversation too abruptly, but I didn't have anything else to add because y'all are so brilliant. So I figure sometimes less is more, and let's just move on. What had to be said was said. But this first question is actually in relationship to some of what we were just talking about. This is from Dawn Stern, Decru. Hey, Dawn. What are some of the things you do to create a secure space? What are things you'd like to see when you walk into a theater that might make you feel safe?
Is that in relationship to the pandemic itself? Like, to wearing your masks and things like that?
I think it's whichever part you feel. It could mean like socially, as I've come across the term global majority recently, which I quite enjoy as a member of the global majority, or
Whenever I see he's in a deep contemplative state. Well, I'll say
I'm thinking.
I'll say like sort of relative to the pandemic. The show that I worked with the actors in person, we were on a Screen Actors contract, and so they had everything just divided like in zones. And I felt completely comfortable because we were being tested every 72 hours. And there was like, this is zone A personnel, and this is zone B personnel, and this is zone C personnel. And so there was this complex system, but I felt, I did feel safe knowing that the people that I was encountering, that sort of like pub bubble or pod that we created for that production, were being really well cared for by the theater, and that we were being tested every 3 days. And of course, there was hand sanitizers and all kind of systems put in place. And so that's why I can say something like, yeah, I'm really excited to get back in the rehearsal room, because I feel like there's some control that can be had in terms of who's in that room, what are the precautions being taken. I'm nervous about being an audience member, and I think that has to do with strangers. And I don't know who's in the room. And another thing that this past year has taught me is that like, I don't have the same values as everybody, including my neighbors, which maybe isn't a thing that I knew in such a definitive way. And I actually, like, I'm totally vaccinated, but I actually do think vaccination is a civil rights issue. And so I actually don't think that my theater should be like, you have to have a vax pass to come in. And so it's this weird thing for me of like, I don't know that I would feel better about being in a space that's like only vaccinated people. I don't know that that's the approach. So I don't know what the approach is, but separate in terms of secure spaces as like a person of the global majority, separate from the pandemic. I've always appreciated just like affinity spaces. And so as part of my career, I don't really like to be the only Black person in a space anymore, and certainly not the only person of color. Like that for me is just gonna be unacceptable. And I wanna know that systems have been put in place to support the success of BIPOC people in a space, whether that's directors, actors, designers. I wanna make sure, like say I'm working with a woman who's the set designer. I want to make sure that that TD isn't gonna flex with this, you know, sort of like mansplaining, kind of toxic masculinity stuff. So these are questions I actually ask, and some of it was coming up for me way before pandemic, and some of it will be stuff that I'm even more kind of microscopic about post pandemic. So it's a huge melange in terms of that question about what makes me feel safe, and as a producer, what are the things I want to do to make other people feel safe. So we could seriously have a whole panel just about that.
I think also in both of those instances too, I think for me with the COVID situations, because now I feel like I've been in a few different ones, so I feel like I also have a different relationship to it, whether I'm directing or whether I'm in a different position. I've also realized, because I also realized that the amount of control I have over the protocols and how I engage with them also factors into this, in terms of my comfortability, and it makes me really aware of like, oh, how do we really make sure that those who aren't the ones in control of the protocols actually have their comfort level as well. But I think part of the reason why the SAG protocols are really comfortable is because not only are they very thorough, they're communicated very intentionally. Like, you know exactly what they are and what they're going to be. And I think that that's true for other things in spaces as well that are not actually usually communicated with intentionality. You know, there's all sorts of different, I mean, I'm not going into any more spaces where I'm the only Native person. I'm just not interested in it anymore, because what I've realized this year is that there are things about all Native spaces that I've actually grown very used to, in terms of like certain white supremacist hierarchical principles not being present, that then the less Native people there are, especially when there's a lot of white people, it just shifts drastically. And if there's no one with whom I feel an alliance, I just can't be, I don't have any desire to be, and systems operating within a space should be able to be communicated with as much intentionality as good COVID protocols are communicated. Because I've also now been in situations where the COVID protocols are not well communicated, or they change because vaccinations have now come out, or they blah, 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 because of blah, blah, blah. And it creates a sense of chaos and fear and anxiety in the rehearsal room that just doesn't need to be there. And I think that that's also true for when there's unintentional systems of harm in any capacity.
All right, I'll jump into the next question. Thank you for that. Boy. Sorry, little, okay, there we are. Marjorie Freeman is looking forward to more outdoor theater. Peter, you mentioned that you were doing an outdoor Romeo and Juliet this summer.
Yeah. Yes.
You want to talk a little bit about that, and also anyone else who is doing outdoor productions?
Sure. A number of theaters are doing outdoor productions. Of course, you know, Elm Shakespeare is doing outdoor production. You know, my production of Romeo and Juliet in America, it's fully called, is with a happy ending. So I am taking the text, I'm reshaping it, I'm looking at ways to tell it in a completely different way. I'm looking at having Romeo and Juliet being female, both female, both female. How do I put that? So we're looking at 6 actors. With a street drummer. I'm looking at the end and reshaping the end to see how they don't die. It's a happy ending. That's what the theater gave me, and I'm looking to see ways that I may do that. African American Shakespeare Company is doing the complete works of Shakespeare outdoors in San Francisco. So, you know, as Don was talking earlier, I just left West Coast Black Theater Troupe, in which we were tested 3 times a week. We could, if I wore a mask from my housing to the theater, I would have to remove that mask and get a new mask before I went into the theater. We were in a pod. No outsiders were allowed who were not vaccinated or in some way protected. No guests could come into the theater. it was very well protected. And now we are in the midway. I just got my second shot today. Woot woot. I feel better about that. So we are in the midway now. Some people are vaccinated, some actors are vaccinated, some are not, and we are sort of in between. So we're still wearing masks. Whenever the director wants to give notes, he or she will come up to our rehearsal area. The masks would go on when we're rehearsing. The masks would go off. We here are tested 3 times a week as well. So there are ways of working through it. But I think the theater space should always be a safe space, no matter in what way, shape, or form, whether we're in a pandemic or not. It should be a very safe space that everyone is welcome. And I'm no longer interested in being the only African-American actor or director or person of color in any space anymore. I spent 23 years at Cal Shakes in Orinda, Oakland, in Orinda, where I was one of very few African Americans until most recently, and I just can't do that anymore. So Don, yes. Right on, Raphael, carry on, my friend.
I am no longer interested in that either.
I spent too much to be in a production of Nicholas Nickleby with 23 actors and being the only actor of color, one of 2, maybe 3. Mia Tagano, I think there were 2 of us in that cast of 23 years ago. I can't do that anymore. No way.
So in regards to kind of our discussion on hybridized theater, from Rebecca Berry, we have what forms of alternative theater are you eagerly anticipating for the post-pandemic world? What future visions do you have for, as Al Peter put it, doing something different in the world of theater? So I guess kind of what does that look like in your minds?
Well, I'll say, I thought for like Zoom play, Ray, your production of Pericles was really great. What I've loved the most, and it's partly impossible, and there was certainly union restriction on it, was the opportunity that I had like to work with the actors and work on it as if it were a stage play and then film it, and that with the streaming, like being able to see Peter and Terry Teachout, Satchmo at the Waldorf. I mean, those things visually, in terms of a visual aesthetic, have been the most pleasing. I like everybody else, there's some Zoom play fatigue. But I've also gotten to do some stuff that was like live green screening or like compositing actors who were completely in different spaces, and it made the postage stamp box go away. And that's been a lot of fun too. Now, this is beyond my skill set, but I did see a demo for a play that some students at UCLA did using Unreal Engine, which is gaming software. And so it looked like fully immersed. I mean, like, it was wild, this demo I saw. Now, that's way above what I know to do. But I also have been gifted an Oculus, which is a VR headset. So I've been trying to just learn a little bit more about VR. And I think all of that stuff is full of possibility. And I'm an avid theater goer. I'm not one of those like bitter theater makers who doesn't go to the theater. I am an avid theater goer. And like Peter said, I too have loved being able to just be in my jammies, to just sort of like Apple Play something from my computer to my Roku and just watch it at home. I have loved being able to just like watch a play at 3 PM and not have to start a 3-hour show at 8 o'clock at night. So I've also just loved the kind of like on-demand options. So yes, I want live theater back, but I hope the unions let us continue to stream some plays. Like British and Canadian and commercial producers have been able to do that for a very long time. For regional nonprofits, it's been a barrier because of the cost and the union stipulations. So I hope they kind of keep that flexible for us so that we can stream the things that we do live. But I also would love for as a field for us to tap more into this VR, into this gaming stuff. I mean, I wish I could just show it to you. It was like the students were acting in their own spaces in green screen, but it didn't even look like the green screen stuff that I've been doing. Like it was video game, like they were moving and it was like 3D and it was like choose your own. It was bananas, and I am here for that sort of exploration of how we can be storytellers.
Here, going to Carl's, the 13-year-old boy come to see the Lear. You know, I barely understand artificial intelligence and virtual reality, but that's what my students are really interested in, and they are creating amazing things that I don't know much about. I personally have, just because my life is so tied to the computer during the day, Zoom fatigue doesn't even qualify it. But what I have rediscovered is my love of radio drama and working with the radio station at a university and just listening to, like my grandparents used to do, just listening to stories being told dramatically, the radio. And that's something that we will definitely continue. It's very simple for us to do. It gives a lot of opportunities to our students. And according to the data, a lot of people are listening to them. You know, the whole podcast thing. Another thing that students are very intrigued by, but this one I really do not quite understand, is Instagram plays. But I just don't like to look at my phone, things like that. But that's where the future, so hopefully we can make it happen for them. But for me, a good radio drama has been absolutely delightful.
Just in regards to Pericles, thank you, Dawn. I really appreciate that. One thing that going into it that I knew was that I needed, or I wanted to make it visually stimulating, because I didn't have the use of bodies, right? You're cut off at the shoulders, and even if you're standing, you only get about torso deep before they're just too far away from the camera. So I knew that the visual component, and as well as the sound, was going to be key to making the making the production successful and engaging. So I think when you look at a hybrid, and as long as you when you're working on Zoom theater, as it is now, you can either go two ways. Like Antonio mentioned, you can focus in on the listening and the storytelling, and you can simplify it, or you can go the other direction, the VR direction and the visually stimulating direction, and just blow it up that way. But it's all about finding kind of what works best for your situation and your balance. Two more questions. Let's try to squeeze them in real quick. The first one is, do you think when we get back, there will be more funding? That's the whole question.
Yes and no. Yes and no. I think we are seeing, well, first of all, a lot of foundations right now are not answering questions about their giving because they're still trying to figure out how they're recovering. Certainly what we're finding, I mean, and I'm sure regionally specific to what we're finding where we are in Berkeley, California, is there is some incentive if you are pressing forward in this EDI work, anti-racism work, but also funding for theaters that are located in economically depressed areas, which theater I work at is not. I mean, technically our brick and mortar space is not in an economically depressed area. You know, people are writing grants to get all this extra funding for all the testing and the safety protocols that we're finding will be necessary. But this is just speculation on my part. I think should the extra funding manifest itself, it's really gonna be largely from individual donors who are deeply invested in the work of particular theaters, or maybe even it's the like cult of celebrity, like Peter is a celebrity. I think his donors follow him wherever he goes. I was in a meeting with our advisory council at Aurora, and one of our people was talking up Peter's shows in Florida. So I think there's some of that like for people who have demonstrated to their donors a level of care and responsibility. I think those donors are eager to help theaters get over the hump. Foundational giving seems to be sort of a mystery. And I think for theaters who are set on going back to before or maintaining a antiquated status quo, I think they probably won't get as much foundation giving.
Yeah, and I would just add too that, you know, it's a wonderful time to think entrepreneurial and really think outside the box and go outside the foundations. I mean, let's be clear there. I think there were like 26 new billionaires created throughout the pandemic. And so if you have a savvy developmental office, you can craft a narrative and get, you know, maybe go into the private sector and find some of these hedge funds and make a compelling case to say that arts are absolutely vital and essential. And now's your time to do good and give us a $40 million space. And we're doing that at CTH right now to, you know, to not make it a transactional thing. You know, arts is, it's so much more, we talked about it earlier, than this sort of a capitalistic model. But it's a community service in the biggest way. And I don't think that's a negative connotation about community service or community theater. We're serving our community in dialogue with the stories that they want to tell, and they want to interact with us. So I think you can make a very compelling case to get funding outside of governmental and, you know, more traditional funding sources.
Yes, y'all, just sidebar, y'all have no idea how many times all y'all names come up in conversations and in different rooms that I'm in. Just saying. So now people want to ask more questions when I'm ready to, we're ready, about to run out of time. So I am, before I get to these last three, I want to make sure we kind of bring a close to everything. So I'm going to bring back Rebecca and let her make the decision as to whether to hit these last now three questions. Before I do that, I want to thank all of you for this time, this space, for your wisdom, for your artistry, for your creativity, for who you are. It's really inspiring for me as an emerging artist, and I'm sure it's inspired our audience. Thank you for these conversations that have got my brain working, and I just want to talk all night with all of you, and hopefully at some point in the future, maybe we'll be able to do that. So thank you. I'm sure the audience will join me in giving you a round of applause. And I'm gonna turn it over to Rebecca to close us out.
Well, I will applaud with everyone else, I am sure. I would be remiss. I cannot say enough how honored and inspired and grateful I am for this conversation. And all of you clearly are so incredibly busy, and that you would take your time out to have this conversation, and be so generous of spirit and so generous with your incredible creativity. I just say thank you on behalf of everyone in the audience and everyone at Elm Shakespeare. So thank you so much for being here. I cannot say thank you enough. So, but I will try. I will leave it at that for right now.
Thank you. Thank you.
I love you all, and I think it is a beautiful, Carl, you said, you know, create a compelling argument. I think you making an incredible argument for us to go to our funders so that I can do more theater and have all of you come and actually make theater with us. So, you know, so that's to the future.
Thank you.
I do want to make sure I also say a huge thank you to our series sponsors, Webster Bank, Southern Connecticut State University, and of course, Elizabethan Club of Yale University. They really dug deep and did extra so that we could have this series, and we are so grateful. And I want to, if anyone has not made plans yet for next Thursday, it is our last Building a Brave New Theater event, and I am so excited about it. It has literally been in construction since almost a year now, and what we are going to do, it's called In the Shadow, Artistic Responses to a Year of National Trauma. And it's a deep dive with 3 artists who have created new work throughout this year, Dawn Stern and Rebecca Smanga-Frank, and our own Gracie Brown. And it's going to be a conversation. We're going to see those 3 pieces because they're quite short, and we're all Zoom theater. And then there's going to be a conversation led by Kendall Pinkney. And Kendall is the most remarkable, he is a theater maker as well as a rabbinical student, and the space that he creates and holds is truly inspiring. And I keep using that word inspiring, but that is the word for it for right now. So they are going to be discussing their creative process about finding and forging new forms and new voices in response to what's happened in the past year. And then there's going to be a conversation looking at what is the role of the arts and the artist in helping to process. And I'll take the words that Antonio used, restoration and I lost the recovery, restoration and recovery, and looking at those pieces of art and talking with those artists. So I hope you can join us next Thursday at 7, and you can log on. And this will be available on our website. So that's it for me. I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over. You all are more than willing to continue the conversation, or we can have, maybe this just becomes an annual event. We'll have the BIPOC Forum part 3 and part 4 and part 5, because you all are so many things. So thank you. Perhaps we should end it here so everyone can go on and have their dinner and such. So I will say thank you and
thank you.
Mwah.
Thank you all so much. Absolute pleasure. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Dawn, Carl, Antonio, Madeline, Raphael. Thank you so much.
Pleasure to be here.